Hugh. So my name is Patrick Barter. I have since become Shunyananda as part of my practice here at Dorje with Tisziji Munoz. And it seems useful to say something about this scene and my participation in it and the changes that have taken place because of my association and my relationship here, and to do this as a form of thank you and also a testimony to let people know that for certain people with certain needs, this is real, this is for real. Not just this scene here with Tisziji, but this process, the process of actually letting go, of opening up, of becoming more and more liberated, becoming more a part of the flow and less an impediment. And so, to start, I've studied music in different forms ever since the second grade. I started playing drums in the fourth grade. I was playing drum set very early on, and I had a certain technical facility with the instrument, a certain connection to the instrument immediately. And so through high school, that became my focus, and I went on to study jazz drum set performance at the Oberlin Conservatory with Billy Hart as my teacher, which was great. It's hard for an 18 to 22-year-old to understand the depth of his playing, but I'm incredibly grateful for that experience and that exposure and that push that, most of which I didn't even recognize. So after that, I decided to continue at the New England Conservatory, getting a master's degree in contemporary improvisation. And I studied with Bob Moses, who here is known as Rock Alam, actually quite widely known as Rock Alam, which is a testimony to his practice, to who he has become, is continuing to become. And when I met him, I had heard certain things from certain people, and I don't remember who or too specifically what they were, but he was a grumpy, kind of just piece of shit dude, and that good luck studying with him. And that's not at all who I encountered. I met somebody with a lot of joy and a lot of energy and a lot of language too, a lot of vocabulary about practice. And he was one of the first people I met who used the word outside of a musical context. And so it came up, I don't know whether I asked or whether he offered, that he was an admirer of and student of and bandmate of Tisziji Munoz, a guitarist. And I was given some CDs and a couple books to check out, because a lot of my questions had to do with creativity and the creative process, and of kind of recognizing myself as a form of creative limitation on the instrument and in performance, in practice, and in life. But at that point I was so focused on music that life seemed to be just a sort of thing to get through on the way to the next gig or the next rehearsal. So at that point in my life, I had moved to Boston. I was living with my girlfriend at the time. It was our 4th year together. And things were starting to fall apart just because of various pressures. We were living in a crazy place with a lot of stress around. Both of us were sort of becoming detached from where we were and what we were doing. I was becoming a little jaded with NEC as a place to study. She was working at MIT in a lab that, it was, I don't think she felt like it was a long-term thing. So basically it dissolved, and there was a lot of stress around that. But one afternoon, having been given Tisziji number, and on a particularly stressful day, I went outside and dialed it, and I remember the experience vividly. I stood across the street from where I was living at the time, and there was just so much tension, so much friction everywhere. My entire reality was basically like clenched. A lot of pressure. And I had encountered Buddhism, I had encountered Native American kind of spiritual wisdom, and so I already had a sense that these areas, spirituality in general, were answers, not just dogma, but actual answers to personal questions and needs that I had, whether it was to solve a life problem or to play better. And at that point I needed something, some help, and so I called the number because that was all I had. And he picked up. We had a very, very brief conversation, and I tried to describe some of what was going on. And he said, what you're suffering is not you, it's your family. And my understanding of that then is very different from how I understand that now, but it was, at the time, as I understood it, very useful. And I think the even more kind of remarkable and telling thing that came out of that conversation was that I asked to come visit, and he asked me, "Are you ready?" And I said, after a pause, a very significant pause, significant to me, that I don't know. That was the first time that I had experienced silence. The first time for a long time, and it was so starkly contrasted by all the stuff before and after. But that first question, do you know whether or not you're ready to begin this process? That was one of the first real questions I had ever received. I think that may have been the first one. Because I could feel the intensity of the question and the importance of the question. And my mind went totally blank, totally empty. And I was as honest as I could be. I don't know. I felt good about that answer because it came from a place of clarity. In any case, he offered to send me a couple more books. I had to give Rakalam's books back because he, kept asking for them. I didn't want to completely steal them forever. And I went my separate way, which was to move back to Maine and go that way by myself. I apprenticed with a wonderful friend, a very intensely practicing Buddhist, Dan Weaver. I learned craftsmanship, And, his quiet and his peace kind of pervaded his house and what he does. And so as I spent time there, I started to absorb that and to recognize a certain resonance with my pre-existing need for creativity and for practice and for silence and for clarity and facility. All of which came from the same place of, I guess, getting out of my own way. And I was reading books from famous Buddhist teachers, Chogyam Trungpa, most notably, and then there was The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle, and other books that he's written. So I've been, diving in to that from a more kind of accessible, visible perspective. And once again, it got to the point, although for very different reasons, where I needed to seek him out. I needed to find an enlightened being. That's what it was. And so I still had his number, still on my phone, and I called him. Phew. So I'd moved from, I think, a need based on pressure in Boston and pressure from all of these outside sources and pressure from my own just not understanding and not really having gotten to a place where I've started to sense a direction, to a different pressure where I started to sense the direction and I needed to move in that direction. So that was the impetus for actually setting up the first visit. And it was just steeped with significance for me. Even the night before my first visit, I remember vivid dreams where I was talking to Tisziji, and he was explaining to me certain things about what would happen during the visit. One of which was that everything I'm going to tell you, you already know. And I brought that up during the first visit, and he's like, "Oh yeah, of course, no problem." But my early questions were very much kind of based on the Buddhist and kind of modern spiritual literature, and also my own sort of aggressive need to know and understand. So it was almost combative, because what I was being offered, what Tisziji lives as here, is a sort of really kind of amazing cutting through of self and of ego. And everything I had experienced up to that point used ego as a sort of crutch to keep the student hobbling along. And here, that wasn't allowed at all. For me, at least, it was immediately cut down. And so I felt very kind of betrayed and confused. And I wasn't sure by what or by whom, or it was early on relatively painful, because I had to deal with the fact that this self that I wanted to come and, expand into this, infinite creative force was actually just a pile of shit that was in the way. And I hadn't experienced that directly. I hadn't had anybody tell me that and hold me to that standard. And so that was a sort of, enormous difference. And also one that I still use to this day as a sort of barometer for who I'm dealing with. How familiar with the self are they, and what is the relationship to the self? What is the belief in the self? And so I think that it's probably safe to say that my progress to from then to today has been about the release of self, the burning of self. And the term burning is used to describe the energy it releases. You use stuff to create energy, like wood for the fire, as it's said. And I had so many questions early on, very specific questions about specific scenarios, specific teachings. I had a lot of knots to untangle, and Tisziji has had infinite patience with all of these things, and at the same time, no patience whatsoever, because all of them are met with the same, sword, or the same torch, or however you want to think about it. But every question is answered, with complete compassion, and that compassion shows up as complete disinterest in the problem. Like, yeah, cool, that too has to go, gotta go, that's in the way. And when an answer sticks, when an answer is something that I can take home and play with, it's not for long. Those things are cut down, they're released. And at this point, there are not too many questions left. At this point, a question generally comes with its answer. And I mean, my practice is still, it's for real. I have no shortage of wood for this fire, but it has become very different in certain ways. Very similar in others, but very different in certain ways. And I guess to say something about Tisziji and about his kind of general openness to people, which I'm very grateful for, as are so many other, and so many is a little bit of a stretch, as are a few other people who have been, lucky enough to be in touch, to be in contact, to make it out here, to his house, his living space. This isn't like a commune. This isn't a place where just anybody kind of shows up and is handed a pamphlet. And I mean, this is, I think, really about resonance, specific resonance. If it exists, come, let's sit. If it doesn't, no interest, move on. And that, coming from his background of, the Brooklyn spiritualists, Puerto Rican healers, psychics, makes complete sense, because he's extending that sort of function. It seems like he is quite different from what I've read about and seen of his family background, because he is a sort of shocking combination of musical facility and genius in that arena, and of kind of psychic power and directness of thought and clarity of thought, and kind of stunning mind-stopping wisdom. I have a hard time imagining that this particular scenario has ever existed before, or that it will again. But for some reason, I was, allowed to show up, and to ask these questions, and to be heard, as well as to be responded to. And every visit is unique. I've been coming here for 7 years now, and each visit is also, very, very powerful. Sometimes it's obviously powerful. Like, in that moment, I am just, upside down. Sometimes it's a little more subtle, and I'll just notice that something is missing, and that something has left me so much lighter. So who is Tisziji? I think that's a really hard question, because you can go to Wikipedia and check him out. He's a jazz guitarist. He's played with Rashid Ali and Robbie Coltrane and all these peeps. But he's also so much more. And I actually wrote something which is relatively articulate, I think. It depends on who you are, how you show up. I mean, if you're a seeker, you may find a guru. And if you're a musician, you may find a genius. If you are defensive, you will probably find a sword. A question will find an answer will find a paradox. The quiet finds itself. The heart finds itself. If you show up as wisdom, it finds itself. And I think most significantly, that sense of selflessness is reflected back, which I think we all have to some degree, and here it is lived, it is demonstrated, it's not that it has substance, it has resonance. Finally here, a certain silence is given voice, and Tisziji is all of these things and none of these things. It's more than I expected, more than I could have expected. I mean, all I was looking for was some enlightened being. I had no idea what that meant beyond a certain point. And I have learned what that means. 7 years is both a lot of time and not much time. But to feel the depth of change that span of time and this relationship has caused it can be eerie or, wonderful, joyous. And so it's also worth mentioning his two, I guess, primary functions, his two, I don't even know if you'd call them personas, because they're not really, but his two functions. One as a musician, and one as a sort of teacher or a guru. And I feel like I have a certain amount of context for understanding both. And it also gives me a certain amount of baggage to bring to each conversation. So a certain limitation. But a certain kind of context for understanding as well. And so early on, when I was exposed to Tisziji music, having come straight out of 7 years of higher education in music, different kinds of music, jazz performance and electronic music and composition, and just like information coming out of my ears, I had to deal with this music that he was playing that was from nowhere. It was from silence, and silence was not a thing that I could relate to mentally. I had no context for it, and I didn't have the facility with any dharma, the Buddhist dharma or Native American dharma or anything that was deep enough or rich enough or central enough to me to start associating these things. It was here that I started to deal with the fact, or have to deal with the fact, that music can be, and maybe even should be, played from wisdom, a place of wisdom. And it was difficult to relate to his music early on because there were no funny smells, there was no real information in it, and actually that was probably the most frustrating thing. It felt like I was looking into an empty room. I was looking for things to grab onto and to pick apart and to analyze and to sink my teeth into, and there was just nothing. There was just energy, and I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't do anything with it. So I didn't feel an immediate connection in the way that I was used to music. I couldn't say, yeah, it's hip, because I didn't think that. It's like, yeah, they're using synths. That's kind of not that cool. And, he's playing with great guys, but, I had my own stuff that I was listening to. Over the years, and especially because of my exposure to the Dharma and my questions about spirituality that have come up through the Buddhist thing, I had to start dealing with the fact that silence and wisdom and all this stuff is for real in me, and not a story. It wasn't a source of entertainment after a while. It became very serious, is not quite the wrong word, because there's always humor, there's always gratitude, but it became very, very important. And that started to reveal itself in his music to me at a similar pace to what I could resonate with through the teachings. And, based on our conversations here, I've had so many thousands and thousands of questions answered, responded to. And I've read, a significant amount of his writings. There's still plenty more for me to read. But it takes its own form in the writings. It takes its own form in the spoken word, and it takes its own form in the music, and it is the same wisdom in all three. And another one of the most significant points is that, unlike a situation where you have a traditional teacher who knows something, this is a situation where the wisdom, and this is, I think, very, very important, the wisdom is speaking for itself. There is a teacher, but the teacher is the wisdom. There is no stumping the teacher. It's like asking the wind what the wind is. It very much depends on the student to answer their own question at that point. And in this case, there is a lot reflected back. It's very hard to describe, because it's like being seen through at the same time as seen, in a more traditional way. There's I think that language really struggles to deal with how this works. Things fall away, things dissolve, things burn away, things are all of a sudden, torn away. I described this process once to a friend as, being one of extreme urgency. A question is answered with the same urgency that, a sword meets a neck. This is not for anybody's pleasure. This is for everybody's liberation. And yeah, it's for real. The music is the same way. It just cuts in, cuts through, and you know, if the listener can notice what's happening, good for them. But it does what it does. And I am incredibly grateful and like humbled to be here, to be able to show up and make these videos, in case, you know, a couple people can resonate with this in the way that they need to. The opportunity may not be here for everybody, but this has given me not hope, because hope is interwoven with doubt. This has given me direct experience that this process of liberation and of becoming problem-free actually exists, and it's real, and I have and still am walking that path with confidence and taking what comes with it, which is it is what it is. And yeah, I don't know of a different way to do it. Yeah. So, thank you to Tisziji, Bapuji. Love always. Hugh.